Hello, it's time for French Politics here on France 24. I'm Mark Perlman.
And I'm Molly Hall. Coming up in today's edition of The Political Brief, high stakes as President Macron's labor reform reaches a boiling point.
And the battle for the Conservative Party heats up, but some say the top candidate is pushing too hard towards the right.
Plus, slumping opinion polls force the president to rethink his communication strategy.
Well, it's both revered and reviled. France's infamously complex labor laws. For unions, its protections are a right. But for many businesses, they are a burden. Changing the 1,000 pages of rules and regulations is at the center of President Emmanuel Macron's bid to revitalize the French economy.
That's right, Mark. And the government's push for reform is now reaching a critical stage.
The labor code is at the heart of the French social system, and it will stay that way.
Thus begins the first real test of Emmanuel Macron's presidency. On Thursday, his government unveiled a nearly 200-page document overhauling France's rigid labor regulations. The goal is to give French companies more power to negotiate working hours and pay, while slashing the number of workers' committees and limiting penalties for wrongful dismissal. Macron says these reforms are vital to stamping out the country's rampant unemployment, which is stuck at 9.5%, more than double that of the UK and Germany. But he will face steep opposition from hardline unions like the CGT, which has called for nationwide protests on September 12th.
Our fears were well-founded. This is a law that will not fix the issue of unemployment. There is no link between labour rights and decreasing unemployment. It's a law that will favour big businesses, not small and medium businesses.
Macron is not the first French president to attempt labour reform. His predecessor, Jacques Chirac, tried twice, but ended up bucking after mass protests. François Hollande tried too. He was met with strikes, fuel blockages, and petrol shortages that effectively froze the entire country in 2016. Macron's advantage is that this time, trade unions have not put up a united front. The moderate CFDT union and the hard-left Force Ouvrière both expressed disappointment with the proposed changes, but said they would not join in street protests.
Now, last year, Jean-Claude Mailly, the head of the Force Ouvrière union, was front and center in the demonstrations against labor reform. This time around, he wants his troops to stay put. For him, the difference is simple. Emmanuel Macron is not François Hollande.
Contrary to his predecessor, he agreed to negotiate in good faith, and it was probably not what he had intended at first. If I'm told that negotiations will be held, I would have to be stupid not to go.
That then a word from the unions. Now, with the majority in Parliament, Mark, the real test, it's going to be on the streets.
Yes, obviously, September the 12th will be the key date. This is the day on which the CGT union is calling for mass demonstrations. However, it will not be joined by the two other major unions, Force Ouvrière, we just saw it, and the CFDT. So, if Emmanuel Macron manages to survive this day without mass protests, this will be his first victory. However, there will be a second, more political test because the far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon has also called for a day of mass demonstration on September the 23rd. And so again, the streets will be filled, won't be filled. This will be the major test for Emmanuel Macron. But if he passes those two tests, his labor law reforms will be on track.
All right, well, now let's move on from all this talk about strikes to focus on other political parties. And we've got the Conservatives that are in shambles. After losing elections it was supposed to win, the party heavyweights, they've left the stage. Gone, at least for now, are Nicolas Sarkozy, François Fillon, and Alain Juppé. And the favorite to take the helm of the party is Laurent Wauquiez, who makes no bones about being a man from the hard right.
We should not keep our head down. We should not keep quiet. We'll get our energy and drive back. We're going to give the right a voice again. We must stand up and resist. France needs the right and must be able to rely on a right that is unashamedly right-wing.
However, Molly Wauquier's tough stance is not pleasing everyone within the party. For one, Valérie Pécresse, the head of the Paris region, is certainly not a fan.
I don't want our base to shrink. I believe that we should start anew. We will not win in 2022 with ideas from 2012.
And let's not forget that a sizable number of Conservative Party members have actually split and thrown their support behind Emmanuel Macron. Let's take a listen to their leader, Thierry Solère.
What really matters isn't being loud and political posturing. What matters is doing things you believe help your country to move forward. And I believe that I can help my country by supporting the government against populism and conservatism to implement much-awaited reforms.
Well, so then, Mark, when we hear these Conservative members speaking there, in the end, Wauquiez is still the favorite. But is he ready to break a taboo and really forge an alliance with the far right?
Well, that's the question many people are asking within the party, because this would really be a major, major shift, an earthquake for the right to ally itself with the far right. However, I think Wauquiez has something else on his mind. Okay, the Conservative Party collapsed at the last election, but the National Front performance was a major disappointment. Marine Le Pen really disappointed her party faithful, and Laurent Wauquiez is hoping that he can build around him a strong conservative party and siphon votes from the far right. Obviously, this is a long shot, but this is certainly why he's doing this.
All right, well, we're going to switch gears a bit now, Mark, and of course, it is the beginning of September, which means that it is la rentrée in France, and that means back to school time for kids across the country. Well, the new education program has cut class sizes in half for the youngest primary school students in priority areas. This is where educational achievement is historically low and poverty is high.
This is part of a very ambitious education reform, and it's always a very touchy issue here in France, especially when your approval ratings have taken a historic dive during the summer. Well, here's where the president stands now. He's lost 13 points over the summer. Only 30% of the French approve of his actions. And an interesting comparison in an earlier poll with his predecessor, you can see that he is lower than both Presidents Hollande and Sarkozy. He's lost 24 points in just 2 months.
Indeed, and now we've got the government spokesman who's acknowledged that the president's policy changes needed to be explained better. Clément Bonnereau has more on their new communication strategy.
He wanted to be a Jupiterian president, concerned with the broad vision rather than the nitty-gritty of government. Emmanuel Macron sought to distance himself from the media during the first few weeks of his presidency, choosing the journalists who would follow him on his visit to Mali and refusing to take part in the traditional Bastille Day televised interview. An Élysée source was quoted by Le Monde as saying,
"His complex thought process does not lend itself well to the game of question and answer with journalists."
Macron reportedly disapproved of his predecessor's closeness to the media, but 4 months after taking office, the French president is now trying to adopt a more open communication strategy, and the pressure is piling up. Over the summer, Macron has seen his popularity plummet from 43% to just 30%. He's also faced growing criticism from both the opposition and political allies. This as Macron is trying to push through ambitious reforms, including a major overhaul of France's labour laws. According to media reports, Macron now intends to engage once or twice a month directly with the French public via social platforms, which he used extensively during his election campaign. On Monday, he posted a video on Twitter in which he wishes pupils and teachers good luck for the start of the academic year.
Je voulais vous souhaiter à chacune et chacun une très bonne rentrée.
In a major reshuffle of his communication team, Macron also hired 3 new advisors, including former columnist Bruno Roger-Petit as his new spokesman. Last week, he gave his first off-the-record interview as head of state, telling 3 journalists he would be more accessible in the future and loosen restrictions on media access.
That's all we have time for this week, and we'll leave you with some images from the French political scene.
That's right, and we'll certainly see you again next week right here on The Political Brief.
Middle East Matters, presented by Sanam Chantier.
Keep up to date on the latest from the Middle East. We bring you political, economic, and cultural events from the region in this weekly Middle Eastern program.
Middle East Matters on France 24 and France24.com.
Reporters, presented by Mark Owen.
The earthquake and tsunami off the northeastern coast of Japan in March 2011 caused the biggest nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1986. The Japanese authorities had to evacuate a huge area around the Fukushima nuclear power station. But they've worked hard to clean up radioactive contamination. More than half of the exclusion zone has now been reopened. But its former inhabitants are reluctant to return, despite the efforts of national and local authorities to persuade them.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.